Hello and welcome to Matchbook's NFL Betting Strategy Guide. I am joined today by a fearsome trio of experts to help arm you with the best advice to assist you with your NFL betting. So whether you're a newcomer or an experienced campaigner like these three gentlemen, we hope you'll take away some value in insights from today's guide. Let me introduce my guests. First of all, in the top left of the screen, if you're watching us in video format now, is Adam Chernoff. On the bottom right is the Professor Brad Allen, well known to our Matchbook viewers. And on the bottom left is a brand new guest to the Matchbook team this year, Drew Dinsick, also known probably more famously as the Whale Capper. Drew, it's a bit of a first day of school kind of question here, but tell us a bit about yourself. Or is it a first date kind of question? That's kind of a first date kind of question, isn't it?
It is a good first date kind of question. So I'm from Southern California. I care most substantially about NFL, much more than any other sport. Betting NFL has been kind of my principal passion and hobby going back to the early 2000s. So this will be probably getting close up to 15th-ish season betting on the NFL. And at this point, I've kind of established a pretty solid tool chest of angles and an understanding of what matters, what doesn't matter as much, and have a finger on the pulse of all of the key aspects that we need to handicap. So this is pretty exciting to be a part of this, and respect the work you guys do. I watched a lot of the content you guys put together the last couple, especially last year, and it's pretty exciting to now be a part of it. So thanks for having me, and look forward to a fun and informative season.
Well, you're too humble to say it, but I would admit I'm an avid listener of the Deep Dive podcast and the halftime videos that you guys produce as well. Absolutely love that. It's always good when you can mute NBC or ABC or CBS and listen to you guys talk about second half lines. It's fantastic. So keep it up and check out Drew at Whale Capper on Twitter. Right, guys, let's get into it because we've got a lot of stuff to get through today. And I want to talk to you first, Brad Allen. I want to talk about Moneyline versus point spread. It's the most basic thing on Matchbook. We go online. It's the Moneyline, first of all. It's the point spread. Brad, there's so many different aspects because I know we talked to ourselves last year about, when do we take the bigger price over a lesser handicap? Brad, just strip it all away. What's the first thing you look for every week when you make your NFL bets?
Well, so when it comes to handicap Moneyline, I mean, I've always preached sell the points, buy volatility, essentially. I always think people generally want safety. So if you're willing to take on more risk, I think it's, even if it's an extra 0.5% edge or whatever, I do think there is that small edge in the market. And I think it's particularly true early in the season. I think you want to buy volatility. I think you want to be backing big underdogs. So they've historically been profitable. I've got a stat here. Week 1, underdogs are bigger than 8.5 points. They're 17-9. Against the spread in recent years, and I think kind of now teams they're practicing a lot less before the season because of the new CBA. Well, it's not that new anymore, but so the teams don't really know who they are, to be honest. You always hear about the Patriots and the Saints kind of working their way into the season, and then kind of a newish trend following Sean McVay this year is that now teams just aren't playing their starters in any preseason games at all. So there's even less knowledge about who these teams are. So early in the season, I want to be buying these big money lines, 3-1, 4.0 money line dogs, and get myself some volatility.
Adam, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to consider when you're looking at this, if you're a new bettor or established one, is just be aware of the relationship between the money line and the point spread. I think a lot of people will look at either or, but you have to realize that the money line will represent what the point spread should be within a little bit of range depending on the margin. So even though they're different markets and they'll move a little bit differently, remember that everything will start with the money line and then the point spread will be built off of that. So just be aware of the percentages and what both of them mean specifically, and you'll get a very good understanding for what you're really betting on rather than just looking at an arbitrary point spread number.
Drew, I think you're in full agreement with Adam on that one.
Yeah, the only thing I can add, those were both really good breakdowns. The only thing I can really add is U.S. bettors, they really are not paying close attention to the money line market. And I would say there's pretty clear dissection between the folks who are betting this internationally, maybe are starting with the money line. Maybe, they're starting with, what is a reasonable win percentage here, and then work their way into it. Everybody who follows this in the USA, maybe Canada, and, Adam can maybe speak to this a little bit more closely, but, they're always looking at, well, is it 3? Is it 3.5? They're always starting with the point spread, and then, rarely kind of giving due diligence to evaluating the money line potential. So, for those of you who are watching internationally, and the fact that most of the market makers, I'm guessing, are probably coming from, US betting background, and maybe, kind of have that, preconception that they bring to it. You may find in general more value in the money line markets just because they get less attention.
Yeah, so props to international bettors. That's what me and you, Brad. So I think Drew's off to a good start with us, obviously, first of all. Right, we'll move on a small bit from that. We may kind of touch back on that later on in the show. But Adam, I want to start with you with this. I know you were on with Drew a couple of weeks ago on his own podcast, and I was kind of taking a few things away from that, and I was just really interested to hear you're kind of predicting the way the markets move, because, we see those lines that come out Sunday night just after the games. And let's be honest, there's a few kind of ones there that we're looking at going, what the hell is this? So look, what are you taking away from, how do you predict, or is there a way to predict which way the market will move?
Well, predicting which way the market will move really comes down to understanding the different types of bettors in the market. And it's a lot of timing goes into it too. And for me, those Sunday night periods are crazy when the lines come out, but it actually starts the Wednesday, the week prior, when a couple casinos in Las Vegas and a couple online websites will release what are called look-ahead point spreads. So they'll actually set the point spreads for the week in advance on Wednesday. And there'll be a period between Wednesday and Sunday, a week in advance, where these are available for betting without knowing what the next game outcome actually is. So between Wednesday and Sunday last year, 1 in every 4 games moved at least 2.5 points off of what the opening look-ahead number was. So you can learn a lot just from that 4-day lead-up window to that Sunday night period where things get going a little bit crazy. But it's important to remember where you are in the week. If you're looking at Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, or even Monday morning to an extent, the limits are a little bit lower at a lot of places, and there's not as much volume inside of the market. So the moves in that time tend to be a little bit more influential than something later in the week. So you're really looking at any sort of numbers that stand out or any really clear on-field analysis that people are really buying into early in the week. Then later in the week, the middle stages, as you get into Wednesday, Thursday, Friday before the game, there's practices every day. There's injury reports being published for the first time on Wednesday. So you'll see a lot of information start to move the prices between Wednesday and Friday. And then in the 48 hours leading up to the game, you're either getting the recreational narrative, what you're hearing on the news, what you're seeing on TV, what you're seeing on Twitter. That'll have an impact, because in the NFL, there's more recreational betting impact in the markets than almost any other sport you're ever going to bet on. So you just have to think about where you are in the 11-day market cycle, and then who's doing what at that time, because you can get a lot of information just thinking about who's acting at that time into predicting where the market's going to go week to week.
All right. And Drew, just on this, like, you see so often on Twitter on a Sunday where you're seeing, okay, here's the pro action, here's the recreational action. How much stock do you even put into that? Because, like, we see those pros, they were, I could be totally wrong here, but I'm pretty sure the pros were on Minnesota against Buffalo last year when they were laying 16.5 and it went off of 17 or 18.
Yeah, that narrative and that discussion you can't help but laugh at it the more you understand what's going on here, because great. The pros were on the Rams or whatever. Well, yeah, the pros backed the Rams at -2.5 and now they're -4, right? Like, that doesn't imply, people will read into that. Oh, well, that means there's value on the Rams if the pros like it. They're not just going to, take them at 2.5 if they don't think they're going to win by 7, and that's wildly misinformed by what's actually happening in a lot of times. And, it kind of plays into a broader discussion that I don't know how much we want to get into today, but, just how people who are kind of late in the cycle are evaluating what has happened to that point, or not at all evaluating it, just kind of looking for some reason to get a bet down. Like, that absolutely happens mostly on Sunday. And I think the way Adam kind of painted sort of the the 2-week market cycle that we have for every NFL game was pretty well put. And it took me a long time betting the NFL to figure out, like, oh wow, like there is a lot more going on to this than, you know, you roll out of bed Friday, you get the injury report, and you start thinking about what you're going to bet, and then you get all your bets done Sunday morning. Like, if that's the way you're approaching this, you are putting yourself at a humongous disadvantage. And, you know, especially if you're a recreational player, if you're not impacted by limit size and things like that, the earlier you're getting into the market, you know, you can understand and make some predictions pretty well about where things are going based on listening to, you know, well-informed, you know, media, listening to, or getting a feel from beat report writers about what the injury status is likely to be. Because, you know, people aren't really waiting till Friday. You know, they pretty well know who is and isn't going to start on any given week. And granted, if you don't know when you're handicapping on, you know, Tuesday or Wednesday, you know, scratch that game off. You know, there's plenty of other games out there. So, you know, the market cycle as a whole is pretty important to kind of wrap your head around, especially if you're kind of new to this, because it's different than everything else. It's longer, more time to mature. And, you know, the lines as they move across key numbers, the value that you lose if you miss out on that is humongous. And so, you know, that's a pretty important part of being, you know, advantage player in the NFL is learning the market cycle and being able to get ahead of the number.
Brad Allen, I know very much so that you're not a guy that's swayed by the pros public stuff. What's your general strategy about which way the market will move? Are you just kind of happy enough to play it out?
Sorry, yes. Rambling away. Yeah, I mean, you're going to assume that the closing line is the correct line. So you want to get your money down as early as you have a decent understanding of the game. As soon as you have an idea what the number should be, get your money down. Just as a kind of example, Pro Football Focus were talking about their betting product in the last couple of weeks, and they said the numbers they released on Tuesday, if you bet them, that you would have gone 55% against the spread. You know, it's pretty good. You can make a living like that if you bet big enough. But by Sunday, if you bet their numbers, they were 49.5% against the spread. And you know, they're quite smart people. So, like, literally the difference between making a living and losing money, like just being an average Joe flipping coins, is just getting your money down early in the week. The other thing about timing, I would say, is that there can be value on a Sunday. Sometimes you kind of get the big move, you get the syndicates, you get the pros hit a number, and then you get everyone following on. It can be a kind of trendy team. And I remember, you know, again, there's no one size fits all policy, but I remember there was money for the Bengals one week. They opened up 6 and they were just smashed in on a Sunday into 3.5. And I was sitting there going, this can't be right, but you have to have confidence. You have to kind of have a number in mind what it should be.
Brad, you gotta love a Bengals punt, like. I mean, seriously.
And they lost. Of course they lost.
Of course they did.
You know, everyone and their mother was smashing the Bengals, and you know, it went the way you would expect it. But if you kind of have a number in mind, and you know, then you can go, right, well, I've made this 4.5. I didn't like it at 6, but now it's 3.5. I like the Steelers here. So yeah, that'd be my view.
Yeah, it's a really good point to make. But those gambles, they do get pretty ridiculous. And you're just wondering, it's money following money, isn't it? A lot of the time, that's what it is. And it's in so many different sports. So, spoiler alert to our listeners and viewers today, we do a small bit of planning for these podcasts and previews. Believe it or not, we don't just sit down and it all magically happens. So I started a Google document and literally put in a few talking points. And one of the guys, and I can't figure out here, our next topic is how much is home advantage really worth? And one of the guys put Tinder as one of his talking points. So hands in the air, who put Tinder here as one of the talking points, guys? 3, one of you.
Was that me?
Oh, Brad. Is it you? Okay, yeah, because no one else entered it. Yeah. Brad, I'm going to come to you first, because I know we saw this article in ESPN years ago, but with the NBA having a similar issue with Tinder about, you know, the days of people, you know, going to bars and having to chat people up, obviously they're gone. So why Tinder with the home advantage here? Because we'll get down to the real topic of home advantage in a second. But lay it on the line, because we all want to hear this.
Well, this was the ESPN article a while back. It's kind of a trend across the 4 major US sports. I don't know about the rest of the world. It probably is true as well. The home field advantage is very slightly declining. And one of the reasons put forward in this NBA article was that the players players, if they get to a new city, they're no longer going out on the razzle dazzle. They're just getting on Tinder and getting the girls straight round. So they're more refreshed. And you know, I know Warren Sharp had an article about home field. He didn't actually quantify how it had changed, but he had a load of reasons why it might be declining, like referees getting like judged more specifically, so they kind of work out what their flaws are, and normally obviously the refereeing advantages go in favour of the home team, so that's kind of stripped away, or fans perhaps less engaged because they're on their phone, so they're not cheering as loudly. So whatever the reason may be, it does seem to be a trend that the home field advantage is not what it used to be.
Okay, Will, I'll come to you for a sec here. I'm pretty sure that you're a married man, and Adam Chernoff, I know, is definitely a married man. So you obviously don't know anything about Tinder. And Annie's
never heard of it.
Yeah, exactly. Or anything about modern day dating, you haven't got a clue. That's fine. What is your general takeaway from that? It's good to look for these angles, because like 10, 15 years ago, Brad is completely right. Guys were out on the town. They're away from home. They're in a hotel. You get bored. Whereas now it's kind of a bit like, you swipe and they come to the room.
Yeah. I mean, 2 years ago, first season they ever had, I don't know how closely you guys follow hockey, but first season they ever had a team in Las Vegas, and it was a thing. Legitimately, if your hockey team went to Las Vegas, they stunk the next day because they were doing whatever they were doing in the city, and they were not prepared to perform when they took the ice, after spending a night in Vegas before the game. So, this is not, it's long been an angle in the NBA. Like, people talk about the West Hollywood hangover. You have the West Hollywood flu. It's not completely irrational at all. Actually, I don't think. And I think actually I think you can actually expand that a little bit, even beyond just how players are dictating themselves when they're on the road. I think the teams that, certain teams, especially certain teams in the NFL, there's a haves and haves nots in terms of how owners are willing to spend to take care of their teams from a medical standpoint, from a rest, and from a medical science standpoint, from a travel standpoint, how well they're taking care of them, how well they're treating them when they're on road trips. And I think that it has long been a very actionable angle to evaluate cumulative fatigue that is kind of part of the home field advantage, because home field advantage wraps up so many things. Like, clearly there are like things that we'll never be able to work out no matter how well you take care of your players. They're still going to have a tough time if the stadium is rocking loud and you can't get a snap count off and you can't make adjustments at the line and everyone's confused and upset and they're not, they don't know their assignments. Like that is a fundamental part of the game, that if you're in a place like Seattle on a primetime game, you are going to have a very tough time running your offense, and you are going to tip the advantage in favor of the defense getting off on the snap count and getting after the quarterback.
Can I ask you, just in kind of
sure.
brass tacks terms, so we're talking about like the Seattle home advantage. Denver for years, obviously with the altitude, had a massive home advantage. But I mean, I bet a lot of rugby, and generally we look at like a home handicap as worth about 4.5, 5 points. Is there kind of a stock one that we can look up? So I've heard so many people say generally the average is about 3 field goal. But do you take much stock into like Seattle and Denver? Do they get extra points because of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you can break it down into the granular level, there is something that's coming from what's happening in the stadium and how that impacts what you are trying to do from an offensive defensive standpoint. There's something that's coming down from how much you've had to travel, how many weeks in a row you've had to travel, and how long the travel has been. Those are absolutely, components to it. And then the ones that you have to kind of manually add are things like, well, are you a warm weather team that's in Buffalo in December? Are you comfortable out there? Has your quarterback been practicing and throwing the ball in practice in warm weather, and he feels great, and then he goes out there for Buffalo and he can't feel his fingers? Those are things that you can add into home field advantage for certain places, certain times of year, and you should account for them. And I think that is actually a pretty useful differentiating factor, because I don't know how rational or realistically the bookmakers, when they hang an opening line, I don't think that they are necessarily making week-to-week adjustments in home field advantage. They have a general number that is supported by the kind of historical data. They're not tweaking it for situational factors and things like that. And you can absolutely support whatever home field advantage number you think is reasonable using the historical data. I think you should do it carefully, recognizing that it has decayed over the years. So if you take a sample going back to 2000 and you see, oh, home field advantage, it really is 3, and you kind of start there, and then, well, actually, if you look at only 2015, maybe it's a little less than 3, and then you have to kind of add in the certain situational spots and account for them carefully. It's a very complex and multi-part problem, but once you kind of get figure it out, and mostly what you're trying to do is figure it out in a way that you're differentiating yourself from the way the market at large does it, or the way that the opening number is influenced by it.
Brad, Allen, you wanted to come back in on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Mr. Well there. I think you probably need to get as granular as possible. So like Miami in September, the opposing team is in the sun part of the field. Basically, they sit baking for 3 hours. Or Denver early in the season is got a huge advantage historically because of the altitude, and the opposition haven't been training in it and aren't fully mid-season fit yet. So yeah, there's a lot of angles to be had there. I mean, I think broadly, ESPN and Bill Barnwell did a study a while back where he literally went through for each team over the last 5-10 years or so, and like Seattle and Green Bay were top of the list with about 4 points, and basically what you'd expect. So if anyone wants to get that data for their calculations, have a Google of that.
Adam Chernoff, do you have any thoughts on home advantage? How much is it really worth?
Well, if you're going to look at just the win-loss results, you're looking at about 2.55 points historically, and that's declining. It used to be a little bit above 2.75. It's come down. But I think the important thing to remember with home field advantage is there's what it affects in the win-loss, but then there's also the market's interpretation of what the home field advantage is worth. So oftentimes, the home field advantage is really, to an extent, quite static, and has been over the last couple of years. If you're looking at a decrease of about 0.25 points, it's not enormous over the sample size that we're looking at. In terms of pricing a game, you're going to install anywhere between 3 to 5% on the money line, which will translate into about 2 to 3.5 points on the point spread. But that range of what you're actually installing can be inflated dramatically when you add in all these situations and everything that we're talking about, where the market reacts more to it. So there's a very clear answer to what it's actually worth in the league as a whole, but then there's a very different answer that varies week to week based on what the market's interpretation of it. And I think, just to comment on the decline of the advantage that it has, I think a lot of that ties into the amount of tape that's available on teams. Camera angles are becoming more and more available to coaches. There's different ways and more efficient ways to look at teams and game plan for them. There's also more access to doing that while you're on the move. You're not dealing with notebooks and papers and pictures anymore like we were. All the film and all the photos and everything that teams are using to match up against each other is now happening while they're traveling. So teams are becoming much more efficient at game planning for the most part, most coaches. So that, I think, factors in quite a bit as well. That doesn't really get the press that it deserves.
Absolutely. Always a key one, home advantage. Right. I want to move on to key numbers. And Wale, I'm going to start with you first on this. As a recreational bettor, Wale, I've kind of started chasing key numbers in different sports. And obviously we look at the NFL, we're 3.5, 7.5, 6.5 on minus and plus. And I find sometimes that I've kind of chased a bit too much and I've taken away a lesser price. What kind of advice would you give to someone like me if I am chasing the numbers and then taking, not as good as price as I would normally get?
A couple of key obvious, I guess I'll make 3 points. I don't want to steal all the thunder here. This is a valuable discussion, really, and especially if there are people out there who are relatively new to NFL betting, they may not really understand how important this is because it's huge. So historically, about 10% of games decided by 3 points because the field goal is worth 3 points, and a lot of times at the end of the game, teams are jockeying and they're tying, they're taking the lead there. The last second field goal is the deciding factor. In general, 10% of games, that's a lot. You kind of go outside of 3 and, maybe 5% of games land on 6, 7. So those are key. 4, a little less so. And then there's lots of numbers that are not important, right? So 3 key things to think about here. Number one, moves that are, all point moves are not created equal. A move from -2.5 to -3.5 represents, at least 10% or maybe even more win probability there. And so, that is huge. Whereas, say, a move from +2 to -2, where you have all of these kind of dead numbers around zero, not necessarily worth as much, even though it would be worth more points. So that's kind of one thing to kind of wrap your head around. And then, and just the market itself respects these numbers, quite seriously. And so, a bookmaker basically opening up a middle for themselves on 3 is, and I would love to hear Adam's take on this, because I'm sure he's thought through this. If you're opening yourself up for a middle on 3, you are really exposed as a bookmaker. And so if they do cross, then there's a darn good reason for it. And you should, at least in your thinking process, try to figure out why. And then it's also worth noting for those of you who are, international listeners or viewers here, teasers exist in the United States, and you can tease 6 points for the same cost, no matter what the point is, and all points are not created equal. So there are certain ways to take that and make advantage teaser parlays, which you can do to great effect, and is a great way to kind of pad your bankroll over the course of the season. And then the third point I want to make on key numbers is really just looking at specifically if you're taking dogs and you're kind of in and around +2.5, that's really, really when you need to start evaluating, okay, well, what is my money line price here? Do I really need 2.5 points? If there's a pretty substantial likelihood if they lose, they're going to lose by 3, then you really need to start thinking about the pluses and minuses that come along with taking the dog price as opposed to backing the +2.5.
Adam Chernoff, the floor has been laid out for you there. Let's go. What are you thinking?
I'll open with a prediction, and I don't know how to necessarily track this, and I probably don't have the time to do it. But my prediction is that 2019 in the NFL will feature the largest number of different score lines compared to any other season in the history of the NFL. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there'll be more different scores recorded than any other season in past history. Yards per attempt is up. The going for it on 4th down percentage is up. Going for 2-point conversions is up. Teams are really starting to play the math and the numbers. And traditionally within the market, there was always a stop point at 3 and 7. And lines would move. And anytime they got to 3 or 7, they would really stop and hold down. And it would take a lot of money to move it for it. Now we're slowly starting to see 4 and 6 and even 8 emerge, just to a little bit of an extent, and it's sort of trending up in that direction. So we're now opening ourselves up to potentially, we're looking at 3, 4, 6, 7, and 8, or numbers that are all coming into play. As well mentioned, when you're looking at casinos in North America, which dictate some of the market for sure, if not all of it, teasers have a big effect on where bookmakers are pricing their games. But I think this year, with the increased aggression in NFL that we're going to see and sort of continue, it's going to open up these key numbers and sort of deflate their importance to an extent. So while the traditional focus is to really pay attention to a lot of these numbers, and I still think we're going to see those stop points around the 3 and the 7, I think there's slowly the value of playing off of those numbers is going to increase, and you might actually find some value in some spots where you're taking a worse number in some cases than you are paying for it, just because the premium from the bookmaking side is really set hard in stone on 3 and 7. And that may provide a little bit of an edge throughout the course of the season.
That's a fascinating subject. And Brad Allen, this has got to be an area that intrigues you also.
Yeah. Well, it's back to what I was saying at the start. Sell points, but back the money line. If 3 matters less, get rid of it. Lay 3.5 instead, and odds against. So that'd be me.
Yeah, Whale, you wanted to come back in on this one before we move on.
Yeah, I like Adam's take. It's going to be an all-time high for scoregami this year. That's
scoregami. I love that one. Yeah.
I think that's true. I think and actually you see this trend year over year. Like the shape of the distribution of margin of victory was pretty narrow, and it's getting broader and broader. And I think that's very reasonable. And actually, it brings up something that I forgot, which is super key. we're talking about, key numbers all have value. You should know what they are. But, you'll hear that kind of that talk a lot. But in reality, even the numbers themselves are not worth the same in every game. And that goes to say, like, there will be some games this season, and you see them in week 1 where the total is like in the 30s. And then there are others where the total is in the 50s. Well, guess what? A 3 in a game where the total is 38 is worth substantially more than a 3 in a game where the total is 56. Like, as you get into this, okay, well, we're expecting 56 points. There's going to be 6, 7, 8 touchdowns. The likelihood of a missed extra point and the 2-point conversion combination and things like that is so, adds so much broadness to the potential, outcomes in terms of margin of victory that for sure you never buy the hook. In general, you're getting ripped off by 10, 15 cents. But in a game where the total is over 47, you're burying yourself long-term if you're buying the hook in that sort of situation. And there is almost always an advantage to sell when you have these higher total games.
Absolutely. And I know that was kind of hammered home to me last year by our own professor, Brad Allen. If it gets over 48, 49, you might as well just take them on the money line. Brad, staying with you this time. So we're going to look at a kind of a topic here, numbers versus matchups. And Adam will kind of weigh in this in a while. Generally, my viewing of handicapping a game was, if you're sitting down on the line, you want to take pretty much a 50% book. You don't want to get holed in on one side where, you put up a wrong number and you're floored. You just can't make money on it. But what are the alternative ways to handicap a game, Brad? Do you look at like the player matchups in other areas? Because I know you've been a massive proponent of player props, and let's be honest, we made a lot of money on player props last season.
Yes, yeah. A guest on the deep dive with the whale made a really good point about the closing price, essentially, which is literally that it's a weighted average of 1,000 models, and it's weighted correctly, basically, because Pinnacle or whoever, they know what they're doing. So you either need to bet early with your numbers, with your model, or if you're betting on Friday after it's probably been chipped into place, then you probably want to be using something which the market doesn't. And I think that is player matchups. So Pro Football Focus has done a lot of research this off-season about how important coverage is. So how your cornerbacks are matching up against your wide receivers, and how essentially a good offensive line can nullify a good defensive line. So what I'm going to be doing a lot more this season is looking into those matchups. So how these cornerbacks match up with these wide receivers, how the tight ends and the running backs are going to match up in space with the linebackers, how the offensive line is going to be able to block the defensive line. I would say a good example is the Super Bowl last year. When it opened, Patriots -2, most statistical models said Rams won was the best line. And so my first thought was, right, I want to bet the Rams. And throughout the week, not trying after time here, but throughout the week, looking at it, it's like these Patriots cornerbacks match up very well with the Rams receivers. I don't think they're going to be able to get space here. And then you'd seen how the Patriots had dealt with Aaron Donald in the past, running straight at him, throwing away from him. And we ended up on the Patriots. We gave out the podcast, etc. So I would say that going forward, if you have the time to really get granular with the matchups, I think that is an edge.
Well, people view your stuff on insights.matchbook.com because they haven't got the time, Brad, and that's why we have you here with us. Adam Chernoff, any thoughts on this one?
I think just from expanding on Brad a little bit, I think the on-field matchups are certainly important. I tend to put it in 5 different categories, and I think there was a write-up I did last year on insights.com, which you really enjoyed quite a bit with New England, Minnesota. So I think it's not important to try to determine who you want to win or who you think will win the game and sort of come up with your own price and your own probability, but then also try to account for who else is betting the game and what they use. I split the 5 different categories up into numbers. So what are the numbers guys looking at? What stats are important? The on-field analysis, as Brad said, look at the matchups. Does anything really stand out? Information, are players injured? Are there changes? Are coaches changing what they're doing, trying to change their scheme? Then looking at any situations that stand out, team playing back-to-back road games, team long travel, what people in that area might necessarily look for, and then what's the big overwhelming recreational narrative. I think all 5 of those categories very clearly have an impact on the market overall. So I would challenge people this year who are either getting into NFL betting or have been doing it for a long time. Try not only come up with your own number, but then also try get a feeling for what the other people within the market participating are looking at and what influences their decision, just to get the full picture of betting on NFL football.
Whale, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, no, those are both very good points. The only thing I can really add is it was kind of eye-opening heading into last season how much I valued strong defensive performance from the season prior. I read lots of smart and insightful work that was like, look, defense is not predictive year over year. Do not rely on it. And I kind of threw it all out the window. I was like, Jags are historically good. The Vikings have so much depth. There's no way these teams aren't making the playoffs. And lo and behold, neither team made the playoffs. So, there's certainly factors that you kind of learn what matters more, what matters less. And I would just kind of, in a broad sense, qualify for NFL. The passing game and the quarterback play is where you always start. I think the point that Brad brought up about cornerback coverage is huge now. Something that I never really kind of thought. You kind of tend to look a lot at, well, how good is the pass rush? Are they going to get sacks? Are they going to really disrupt this? And we're learning through the advanced kind of analytics community who's working hard on these topics that sacks pretty much belong to the quarterback. And if you're a guy like Tom Brady and you're playing behind a decent or a good offensive line, you're going to get the ball out of your hands fast. You can neutralize a player like Aaron Donald. And on the flip side, if you have cornerbacks who can keep very, very tight coverage against some outstanding wide receivers, it still makes it pretty tough unless you're because you're not going to have big windows downfield to hit these guys for home run plays. And so for sure, kind of starting with quarterback play and working your way down through coaching. And then, beyond that, okay, well, how's my defensive coverage on the other side? Okay, well, if my team has a lead, how is their running game? That's probably much the only time you really need to factor in running game, which is like, are they going to be able to convert red zone opportunities to touchdowns? Are they going to be able to sock away a win if they have a lead? And then, basically the reverse of all of that as you evaluate the other side of things. And, so kind of doing some homework and following the research and figuring out what matters will, I think, help keep you ahead of the curve this year and handicapping the NFL, especially if you're doing it from a quantitative standpoint.
Absolutely. Yeah. Brad Allen, you wanted to come back on that one before we move on?
Yeah, just to expand very quickly on one of Drew's points there. There was a study last year, Bill Barnwell did it, and there is zero correlation between between a team's sack rate from the first half of the season to the second half of the season. There's zero correlation. So everyone going, oh, look, the Broncos have racked up 20 sacks in the first 4 games here. They're a great defense. It's literally noise, and it's much more a factor of the offensive lines they've faced. So I mean that could be an angle to go against if some team faces some bad offensive lines. They face Arizona earlier in the year, rack up 6 sacks. That could be a team to back to bet against when we've got a strong offensive line going for us.
Absolutely. And speaking of noise, Adam Chernoff, is a terrific segue to our next topic: how to drown out the media noise when making our selections. Because let's face it, all 4 of us, we live on Twitter. We do a lot on Twitter. And there's a lot of stuff comes in our timeline that, you're thinking, oh, okay, I should be back with this. I'm listening to this. I'm hearing that. Outside of actually throwing our phone in the nearest river, Adam Chernoff, how do we drown out this noise? What's the best way?
Well, I'll tell you an interesting quick story here. When I was on the other side of this betting equation, on the bookmaking side, I would go out of my way to mute and close and get rid of anything that had any influence whatsoever. Over the last couple of years, I've gone the complete opposite way, and I've actually turned it up. I think it's something that you need to embrace. The amount of money that's matched in the Matchbook markets every week in NFL games is going straight up, and it's not because necessarily people are betting more. It's just because there's more people betting, and the NFL has a recreational impact that is second to none among other sports. So when you're seeing all the betting handle go up, that means that more people are participating, and a lot of people are bringing in the exact same opinion within the market. So if you're able to identify what's driving a lot of that money, that puts you in an advantage. The key part here is to not get caught up in letting that overwhelm your handicap of the game and your pricing. It's something you have to factor in to wait when is the best time to enter the market. and sort of anticipate what it's going to do. But if you have everything closed off and muted and you don't know what that is, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage, not accounting for what's coming.
Whale in agreement here?
Yeah, very much so. And I guess just kind of as a general kind of commentary, as being a sports bettor, you need to recognize that a lot of times you're going to have preconceptions when you come into a specific game. You're going to want to back a certain side because you feel good about a team or you don't like the other team, and you're going to seek out reasons to support your side that you've already started with. And not a lot of the media and narratives that are out there are just designed to fill the vacuum because people want to hear people talk about the NFL, and so be conscientious of you have an actionable angle as opposed to you're just out there looking for some reason to support what you're already coming into this with. And that goes for all sports, but NFL especially, because in the same way we were talking about, there's a long market cycle to help the number mature in the NFL. Is the exact same problem the other way, where there is a lot of space to fill talking about stuff, which I think in general just means the percentage of good actionable information you hear that's targeted to people who are making sports betting decisions is probably a higher percentage of it is useless than maybe other sports.
Yeah, it's a good point. And Brad, I suppose I've kind of been guilty of this. The way you back a team one weekend and they were so good for you, and you like the Rams last season, it was just so hard not to be with them. But then we see them on the road to Detroit and they were double point favorites. So Brad, it's kind of hard to get off a bandwagon sometimes, isn't it? But how do you actually do that and stand back and sit back and say, these guys aren't the value here this week?
Yeah, it's almost a mindset. I think you often find with good sports bettors is literally just question everything. Just like anyone saying anything. I mean, I've probably lost friends because people, friends will say something. I'll go, is that right? Why is that true?
That's probably not the only reason, Brad. But
yeah, no, it's because I'm away. Sorry. No, but just question everything. Go, is that true? What's your basis for that? Why are you saying that? And people soon shut up because a lot of people are spouting garbage. But it's the same in the media. If you just question everything you hear, I think you'll probably do better.
Yeah, just have that image of Brad being argumentative. It's just in your nature, Professor. It's just in your nature, man. I just can't do it any other way. Right, let's not pick on Brad anymore. Adam Chernoff, I want to talk to you about this next topic because this is kind of a counter argument to what I started off in the previous topic with team news. I mean, you made a good point on Twitter a couple of weeks ago. You were showing your followers literally you get an alert on Twitter when you go in and look, you can go onto anyone's. I actually have, believe it or not, I actually have this for Brad Allen. When he puts up his MLB bets, it comes straight to my phone. So, Prof, I'm all about you most days, man. So things like that, are there different kind of tactics that people can do with their social media accounts to keep abreast of all the team news?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to say that every coach will do between 4 and 5 press conferences a week. And then they'll also do 1 or 2 conference calls with the media. You can see all of those press conferences where they talk about probably a lot of the stuff that people wish they knew before they bet that they couldn't find listed elsewhere. So, I mean, you can go to either their Twitter page, their main NFL page, their Periscope page, set your alerts. I've got about 20 already this morning of coaches at the podium. You'll get different players, offensive, defensive coordinators, and just from that, you'll learn a lot. There's lots of different tools for like injuries, player news. RotoWorld's a good one, but Twitter lists, great for that. If you want to throw around a little bit of money, you can buy direct player feeds, odds feeds as well, from a couple of good sources. So you're always having updates beeping on your screen. Mine goes nonstop all day. That's really important too. But again, you can get all that information, but if you don't know how to use it, it doesn't do you very well, and you can end up drowning in it. So I think it's important to not overreact to anything that comes in and realize that some stuff may sound important. It might be great that the second string receiver's coming into play for the first time all season, and he ran a 4.3 at camp, and he's super fast, but he may only get 3 or 4 touches that don't have a huge impact on the point spread. So knowing what impacts the game and what's going to move a market and what people are sort of going to latch onto is important. So if you do set any of these things up and start utilizing that and dealing with the alerts, just don't overreact when they come in, process it. and really try to focus on what has an impact on the point spread and on the market as a whole.
Drew, what about you? What are your thoughts on this one?
I agree with all of that sentiment. The only thing I would add is that even though you have all of this time to kind of glean all of this information, there are still going to be a lot of things that you can't get your hands on just because of, you don't have the bandwidth. And I've found that it's extremely effective to have a network of people who are like-minded, who are doing their own handicapping to kind of canvas all of the information possible so that you can have kind of a broader distribution of just information channels at your fingertips. And then if you've kind of got the skill set down of being able to sift through what's noise and what's signal, then it's important to have that. But just a broad network of kind of like-minded folks kind of working on, working and helping each other out is really, really, really effective way to kind of narrow down what's useful and what's not as far as information that would affect the handicap.
I love that point. And Brad, you're a guy that has often suggested to me that, okay, this guy is worth a follow on Twitter. This guy is worth a follow on Twitter. I presume it's kind of less is more, though. You can't just follow everyone.
I know more is more for me, Sully. I want all the information possible, and as I say, I'll try and sift through what I think is valuable. But just everything I can get, I don't know how many people I follow on Twitter. It's like 4,000 plus.
Hey, what about this metric? Don't you have to have more followers than the people you follow? You got to be careful of this, Brad.
I am not worried. I'm not vain, Sully. I'm not an influencer. I just want information. But I mean, so yeah, organise it via lists. I mean, I've got a list for basically every sport, and I use TweetDeck. I have that open at work all day, and yeah, I find it incredibly valuable. And to Drew's point, like WhatsApp groups, if you can get in a WhatsApp group with even just 3 other NFL fans, it's just such a good idea. It's such a good way to test ideas, throw out information. Obviously, they're throwing out information to you. They're going out, well, what do you think about the Jets +3? And you go, well, I don't like the offensive line. And it's just, there's a book, Super Forecasters, and it talks about the best way to get to an actual good opinion or projection is just sort of whittle away at it, like keep challenging it until you get to the actual truth. So yeah, find some like-minded people and get in a WhatsApp group.
Get a WhatsApp group. So you can just do what I do, Brad. I just text you. It's just easier that way. Let's talk about. I want to talk about totals, guys, because I'll be honest. I love betting totals because it's the game within the game. I love team totals. I love main game totals. I love first half unders. Prof, you definitely know that. Will, let's come to you first. I mean, look, talk me out of betting totals. I think you might be in agreement on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Most of the attention, most of the air is sucked out of the room talking about sides, period.
Yeah.
Drives the interest of the casual bettors into this, into the market around sides, which I think leaves the totals to those of us who are kind of more serious about this. So in one sense, yeah, maybe you're in a pool with more sharks, but in another sense, you have a lot more, there's a lot more data to kind of support a decision-making process around a total than you do necessarily have for a side. Because that when you're relying on a handicap for a side, you're specifically looking at differentiating factors that you may be able to completely set aside when you're capping a total, because a lot of times an over/under is going to be based on what's the pace of the game, what's the game state, like how is the game flow going, like it's a back and forth score for score, or is this more of a a field position battle? And those sort of things are usually left out of the general conversation about a game. Granted, if you are focusing on how will the game state play out, you can a lot of an edge on the side, but that's a different discussion entirely. But yeah, no, I would strongly suggest that if you're someone new to this, definitely spend some time handicapping totals. Recognize that a lot of the models that inform total, what the opening totals that they hang are based on historical data that is always under kind of dynamic forces that reflect the current state of the game, not necessarily what is in the database that inform those totals. We saw last year, the first 4 weeks of the season, overs were like wildly underpriced. And then there was a huge overreaction where the average total went up 3-4 points across the league as weather got colder and more windy and more the quarter, more injuries accrued, and that tends to affect the offense more. So, it was quite a roller coaster if you were following pretty closely on totals last year of over, under, and those kind of waves. If you can be on the front side of those, you can be extremely effective handicapping.
Brad Allen, let's pick up the weather aspect because, we love this whole 2 hours before kickoff, getting these tweets in Buffalo when there's a cascade of snow coming down that the points total hasn't totally reacted. I mean, look, even regards weather there, I mean, sometimes it's hard to put too much stock into it, Brad, because we've seen a lot of wet games have gone over the total, and there's even been some of those snow games. I mean, the most famous one was a couple of years ago with Philadelphia and Detroit in Philadelphia, where you remember that total getting absolutely hammered down. Yeah. And what did it end up with? Like 80 points between the two sides, something like that.
It was like 6-0 at half time, and then none of them could tackle in the second half. I think they probably got cold or something, and it was like 40 points in the second half, so it went way over. It is tough. I think the market is definitely getting wiser to wind and this kind of thing. I think it's probably the DFS boys to blame. They're all shouting about it all the time now. So that edge, I think, is dissipating. But one thing, again, is about volatility. I saw a study recently that basically the margin between whether it's over or under, if it's windy or wet or snowy, whatever, the margin is much bigger. So if you want to play, I know Drew likes his alternatives, or if you're a spread better, it's quite risky. Don't do the spreads because you can lose big.
But people got burned a lot, like with the spreads.
Yeah, maybe some alternative over-unders, and you've got statistically you do have a better chance of hitting that in some funky weather.
Adam Chernoff, what are your thoughts on this?
I actually struggle a lot with building a price from zero and only focusing on the total. A lot of my total plays will come from a side established first, and that doesn't necessarily mean I'm betting on a side, but it'll just confirm or go against the game state, which I think is how it will play out. And then I'll sort of fill in a box score from there and get like a different range on what I think could be probable for like the amount of plays run and the distribution of those plays. So for me to go from zero to a total from just pricing a market overall is challenging. So my totals always come from pricing a side first, which is maybe a weird way to go about it. But that's just how I do it. So it really depends on the value, but I don't necessarily look when I'm pricing a game to bet a side or a total. It just sort of comes out to what the price is available and where I see the most value.
Absolutely. It's important not to be just betting totals blind because you enjoy doing that. Gentlemen, we are almost out of time, so we had one more topic to cover. So I'm going to fly through this one, and I'm going to start with you, Drew, first. Give us a few websites for people new to the NFL, or even people who are kind of dab hands and may have not heard. Like, what are your top 3 or 4, if you can kind of list them up pretty quickly?
This changes every year. I guess I'll give Football Outsiders a shout because they have done a pretty careful job of kind of going through and giving you a good opponent adjusted metric that I think is useful for coming up with some context and so that I like a lot of what they're about and what their research is doing, and I obviously look the folks at Pro Football Focus are continuing to get better and better. And really, so much good information comes from that I get nowadays comes from a handful of people who are just on their own, working hard on Twitter, in the analytics space, and I guess I'll give Ben Baldwin specifically a shout because he did a really nice post, kind of giving you an introduction to using platforms. So I saw a programming platform called R to scrape data and evaluate it for yourself. And I think that's a wildly valuable kind of tool to have in your tool chest. So those are kind of, the people that I think are doing the most solid work week in, week out, as far as evaluating, what happened in a given game.
Brad Allen, I noticed you're nodding your head a few times there. I think you're in agreement with Drew on a few of these. We lost Brad. He forgot to unmute himself. There you go. That happens. There you go.
Sorry, I'm an idiot. I would be agreeing with the individuals angle that, obviously Football Outsiders, Pro Football Focus, they do good stuff. But there's so many useful people out there on Twitter kind of generating, like all these new people who are using R, like Drew says, and working with expected points data and stuff. So probably the best advice I would give would be go and subscribe to my NFL Twitter list, because I've probably got 200 of the smartest NFL people I've found. And, I do this all year round. So just go and take advantage of that. And it will have Pro Football Focus and Football Outsiders in there, but just also a load of smart people doing stuff. And yeah, I think that's a good resource.
And it saves you a bit of time because Brad has already done it. You will see Brad's Twitter handle there on screen. But you might as well just tell her what is Brad Allen NFL at Brad Allen NFL. There you go. One. Adam Chernoff, very quickly, any more to add on this one?
www.twitter.com/@Sully Matchbook.
If people are going to be waiting around for me, Adam, they're going to be for long wait. Then they're going to be inundated with rugby union stuff. So I don't know anything that's really going to clarify to NFL. Very quickly, guys, I really enjoyed this. Is there anyone has a pearl of wisdom? Is there anything you've heard in the past that you've listened to and said, regards NFL betting, and thought that is probably one of the best pieces of advice I can give or I've heard? So you're absolutely allowed to plagiarize someone else's here right now. Whale, anything coming to mind? I'm kind of putting you on the spot here.
Oh man, I guess I think we covered some really, really important topics.
Yep.
Particular episode of this. And if you kind of go back and if you want to revisit any of the stuff we focused on, I think the tip that Adam gave about looking at the look ahead lines, starting your evaluation process a week early, gives you the best chance to be ahead of the market. And when it comes to, I guess what I've learned, because of the uniqueness of the NFL market, you almost have to have closing line value on all of your plays. Not all of them, but like 66% of them. Like you need to be ahead of the market on about 66% of your plays in order to have a winning season in the NFL. And your best bet to do that is going to be start early, get the look ahead lines, and do whatever you can to get a better number than the closing line.
Adam Chernoff, in about 30 seconds, have you got anything for me?
Yep, and this is especially true for everyone who plays at Matchbook, but if you're not playing at Matchbook, you should be playing here anyway. But no matter where you play, better versus better, not better versus bookmaker. If you know what everyone else is around you and how they're acting within the market, it's a buying and selling game. If you know what everyone's buying, you can find the best place to sell. If you know what everyone's selling, you can find the best price to buy.
You're so earning yourself a job in the Matchbook marketing team, by the way. Fantastic job. Well done. Brad Allen, anything before we close out?
Not really. I mean, just read everything. As I say, I think information is power, and just get as much in your brain as you can and try and work out what's valuable. Information
is power. Absolutely love it. Gentlemen, absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Right, that's it from us. Don't forget, each Thursday morning of the 2019-2020 season, the guys will be breaking down their best bets for the weekend ahead. So that's where we actually make the money. We're talking about making it today, but we're going to actually make the money then. So don't forget to follow us on Twitter at @TMatchbook and at Matchbook Pod, and on Facebook and Instagram. And as always, you can download the Matchbook Betting Podcast on your preferred podcast app. Thanks for watching or listening today, and the very best of luck with your NFL betting for the season ahead.